Welcome aboyim to the seventh and continuing series of shiurim on the commentary that Netziv the Hamagdavar to the Chumash. We've spoken about several important themes in Netziv's commentary. One of those themes, of course, is the two concepts, two ways that we look at things, at man, or even, right, at the world, and the Kadosh Baruch Hu. There's, of course, the natural dimension, and there's the metaphysical, the divine dimension. And we've spoken about that in several places where the Netziv, in fact, actually identifies these two dimensions of man, and that there are two perspectives of man. Man as a natural being embedded within the natural world, within the context of the natural world, and man is a divine being that's connecting to God on a metaphysical level. Netziv understood that these are the two understandings of the word Adam as they appear in the Chumash, and we spoke about that. Now, we're going to go a little bit further and take these two concepts and see how the Netziv actually utilizes them in his commentary, in hermeneutics, in other words, in his methodology of understanding the text of the Chumash. Now, as you're all aware of, if you haven't been aware of it previously, I'm sure that recently you've been aware of, is that we see in the Chumash that there are different sections of the Chumash in which the Shem Hashem, the name of God, is in fact different. In fact, appears differently. This issue comes up notably in the Parshas of Bereshis. We spoke about the difference between the first account of creation, which uses Elokim, Bereshis ba Elokim. In fact, that's just about the first Rashi in Chumash. Why does the Torah, in fact, use the word Elokim? And between the second chapter in Bereshis, the second Parsha Bereshis, in which Yud Kei Vav Kei is also used, Hashem Elokim is used, and we spoke about the Netziv's approach, in which we are looking at two perspectives. Elokim, the Netziv understood not as it's usually understood, meaning justice, pure absolute justice, but rather referring to the natural law and natural creation, as the first to Yud Kei Vav Kei, which emphasized man's relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Yud Kei Vav Kei. That's how we spoke about that, and we brought that up in several previous shiurim. What's interesting is that the contrast, or this dichotomy between Shem Elokim and Shem Yud Kei Vav Kei, which the Netziv uses, of course, this dichotomy is used by other Mefarshim to indicate either two aspects of God, in the lonely man of faith, two aspects of man. But in any case, this dichotomy continues throughout the Parshas of Bereshis. In particular, probably the most notable place where it occurs is, in fact, in Parshas Noach. In Parshas Noach, as many people will have noticed, either religious or non-religious, that in fact the account of Noach, which actually begins really at the very, very end of Parshas Bereshis, is in fact divided into different narratives in the Chumash. Some narratives, most narratives actually use Shem Elokim, certainly from Parshas Noach, but in other words, there are some narratives that use Yud Kei Vav Kei. And of course, there have been, the Rishonim, of course, have paid attention to this and have in fact actually commented on this. More recently, more modern commentators of Chumash have also noted this, and have used different techniques, which we won't go into now, in order to try to explain the motives of the Chumash for changing, the Devar Hashem is in fact changing the Shem Hashem from Elokim, Yud Kei Vav Kei, back to Elokim, etc., etc. Now, the Netziv's approach is a very, very interesting approach, and I think this Netziv approach is actually not only an interesting approach in this case, but actually is going to be a springboard for a lot of the methodology that Netziv uses in other parts of the Chumash, where the Shem Hashem, the name of God, is not necessarily the issue in the text, which is challenging the commentator. The Netziv I'm going to refer to and speak about and begin with begins in Perek Zayin Pasuk Aleph, right? It says Vayem Hashem l'Noach, Hashem Kadosh Baruch Hu Yud Kei Vav Kei, Vayem Hashem l'Noach Yud Kei Vav Kei. It says to Noach, Boy Ata v'chol beischa l'Teva, come you and all of your household into the ark, into the Teva. Ki oischa ra'isi tzaddik l'fanai b'dor hazeh, because I've seen that you are a tzaddik in front of me in this generation. So the Netziv, in his commentary on Ha'amek Dava, once again we're Perek Zayin Pasuk Aleph, Vayema Hashem, Hashem of course is Yud Kei Vav Kei, V'chol ha'inyan l'fnei ha'mabul, right? Says Netziv before the Mabul, that was the entire account of the Mabul, Ula'acharav, and even after the Mabul, Ksiv Elokim. It's interesting, Elokim appears just about all the Parshas Noach. Not only before the Mabul, but after the Mabul too. Even the commandments, of the what's called the Sheva Mitzvahs B'nai Noach that appear later on in Parshas Noach, the command uses the Elokim, the term for Kadosh Baruch Hu, Elokim, and not Yud Kei Vav Kei. So the Tzitz says, B'chol ha'inyan l'fanei ha'mabul la'acharav Ksiv Elokim. Levad bazeh, except in this specific narrative, right? Hamayma kaziv havaya. Here it says, Vayem Hashem l'Noach. Ukva omer al zahar Ramban has already discussed this as an Netziv. Because of Sheramas kan inyan kalbonish al zeh nistava kan lahave shivas minat ha'ira. We see that Ramban says that what's unique about this narrative too is that in the previous narratives, the previous parts of the Chumash, HaKadosh Baruch Hu orders Noach to bring two of each type of animal. Here, HaKadosh Baruch Hu commands Noach to bring 7 of each type. So these 7 are actually going to be used, we see later on, for the kabbanis, the sacrifices which Noach will offer after the flood, after the Mabul. So the Ramban says that since in this section, actually the immediately right after this, from the Behemah Ta'ira, from the pure animals, right? Shiva ish v'ishtoi, 7 pairs, right? And of course, when the Behemah Shaloi Ta'ira, animals which are not pure, Shanayim ish v'ishtoi. So the Sheva, Behemahs, ish v'ishtoi is a remez, an allusion to the Korban, right? So because of this, we have the Shema Miyucha. And of course, this is rather important because we know from Vayikra, right? Other parts in the Ramban speaks about this at the beginning of Vayikra, based upon a Gemara in Menachos Daf Kuf Yud Amud Aleph, that in Korbanos the Shem Yud Kei Vav Kei is used, so that a person should not be mistaken to think that the Korban is actually, Chas v'Shalom, a sacrifice to polymorphic deities. This is in fact actually what the Gemara Menachos says. There's a tremendous amount of discussion in the Ramban, because the fact is that we do say Shem Elokim in certain Kabbanos. There's a very beautiful Ramban that discusses the very profound and very profound nuances between Elokim and Yud Kei Vav Kei when they're used in the case of Kabbanos. But nonetheless, the Ramban here explains that Yud Kei Vav Kei here is being used because, in fact, the Torah is speaking about Kabbanos. Now, the Netziv is actually going to take is actually going to, I don't want to say further this technique, but that's what he's going to do. He's further this technique based upon the Kidmas HaEmek, that in fact actually, in other words, our understanding of the Chumash, continues and deepens throughout the generations. But with this, I want to actually give a little bit begin by way of introduction, side comment. It's interesting if we step aside and we know that the Chumash, right, is understood by scholars. Right, we understand the Chumash is Devar Hashem, but from a literary point of view, so it's interesting that the scholars have raised the issue: what distinguishes the Chumash from other, what you would call ancient texts, what I would call ancient literary texts, or the literature of ancient texts. We know that we have thousands of ancient texts from time immemorial. It's very interesting that we don't have ancient texts. We have the Chumash itself. In other words, in the different texts that arose in the ancient world, Babylonian texts, and other different types of texts, you can actually see a development of text over time. In the case of the Chumash, there are no ancient texts of the Chumash, they're just the Chumash. That's a very interesting point of Hashkafa in the scientific understanding of the Chumash. All the hypotheses as to the origin of the Pentateuchal text, which are put forth by scholars of all kinds, has absolutely no evidence to base itself upon. But in any case, Gilgamesh, for example, the Babylonian myth of Gilgamesh, in fact, you could see actually the progression of the text over a period of time. In the Chumash, we don't see anything like that. The Ur text of the Chumash, which scholars posit, actually belong to what's called the vacuum set. They don't exist. But in any case, that's just a little bit of a digression. But I want to think about how do we understand, from even an objective point of view, the difference, the nature and style of Terasenu Akdesha, and between what we would consider to be ancient texts as they arose, if not at that time, close to the time of Matan Torah. So it was a very famous German Jewish scholar, a Yeke. He wasn't from. His name was Erich Auerbach, who actually wrote many essays. I think the essays were collected in a very famous book called Mimesis, Mimesis. And Mimesis actually deals, the subtitle is the nature or the changing nature, the representation of reality from a literary point of view throughout history. The first essay of Auerbach, he wasn't from, by the way, so he has a din of a kafela amor. We can take him, he's not going to be marim nasei. But in any case, the Auerbach has the first essay in Mimesis, I think it's called Odysseus' Scar. And he contrasts or compares the ancient Greek text, the Odyssey, with in fact the Chumash, and actually focuses on the Akedah in the Chumash at the end of Parshas Vayera. Interesting. And what Auerbach says is very interesting. He says is that the ancient Greek text is actually a text, what he calls a text which involves what's called rhetoric. And that, in other words, the character's motives, his feelings, his understanding, the entire background is brought, is in fact actually expressed. It's brought to the front. In other words, we know everything about the motives of the characters, the different characters of the plot, etc., etc. In other words, nothing is really hidden from the reader. In other words, the text is actually a text, intrinsic to the text is what's called rhetoric. It's telling us motives and feelings and backgrounds, etc. Right? This is in contradistinction to the Akedah. In fact, actually in the Akedah, we don't know very, very much about the motives of the background. The Psukim, in fact, communicate to us a certain reality, and the story, as in fact progresses, is in fact actually there's a certain, let's call it, suspense, because really the background and motives, etc., has to really be filled in by the reader. Now, Auerbach, of course, is speaking as a scholar. By the way, I refer you to the essay. This is a scholar. It's a very, very good essay. I probably haven't done it really justice. Maybe we'll speak about it another time. Maybe we'll get the Akedah. But in any case, the important issue which I want to discuss is that really what Auerbach is, perhaps you could understand of Auerbach speaking, that in fact in the Torah Shebechsav there's an intrinsic Torah Shebe'al Peh. That's why one way of learning Auerbach. In other words, the Goyim, the nations of the world, do not have Torah Shebe'al Peh, as we all know. They have a Torah Shebechsav. So therefore, their texts are ones of, in fact, of rhetoric. But, we have, Klal Yisrael has what's called a Torah Shebe'al Peh, and therefore, the text itself, right, the Lasana text has to be, in fact, is filled in through the Torah Shebe'al Peh. That's a way of understanding it. But I want to actually go even a step further. Most commentators, when in fact they look at the Chumash, will see different Shemas Hashem and try to look at what is the Chumash, in other words, Shemesh Hashem, and therefore they'll try to, create, Perushim, commentaries, right? In other words, what they'll try to do is they'll ask the question, why is the Chumash using the Shem Hashem? And that's what the Ramban is saying. The Ramban says, why does the Chumash use Yud Kei Vav Kei? Because there's a rebbe to the Korban. In other words, the commentator, when he sees the change in the name of God, Yud Kei Vav Kei, will ask the question, why is the Chumash changing the name of Hashem to Yud Kei Vav Kei? That's the question. The question is why. However, I claim that the Netziv is going to be using a different technique. Namely, is that the question is not why is the Chumash using Yud Kei Vav Kei, but rather, given the fact that the Chumash uses Yud Kei Vav Kei, this is directing me in how to understand the text of the Chumash itself. In other words, the Shem Hashem, the Shem Hashem is a signpost. It's a guide which helps me and directs me the way in which I'm trying to understand this text. That's in other words, that's the technique of the Netziv. In other words, you could say is that the technique of the Rishayim is look at things from the God side. Why did HaKadosh Baruch Hu reveal to Moshe Rabbeinu Yud Kei Vav Kei, right, in the beginning of this narrative, in Perek Zayin Pasuk Aleph? The Netziv is actually looking at it from the man side, from the commentator side, from the hermeneutical side. Namely, given the fact that we have Yud Kei Vav Kei, which stresses not man's natural dimension, but rather man's ethical dimensions, how are we supposed to interpret? This is a signpost, right? A sign which leads us that we're supposed to actually look for what you would call an ethical interpretation of the narrative itself. In other words, the Shem Hashem is the guide and prescription for the method of commentary on the text itself. That's the important idea of the Netziv. And that's what the Netziv says. והנה לא יוסיף עוד טעם שגם על הפסוק הראשון של הפרשה דייק שם הוויה במה שאומר השם בוי אתה וכל ביתך לטבע, come to the טבע, והנה המפרשים הבינו שכיוון השם לבונו והוא של נשסיים. הקדוש ברוך הוא, in other words, meant that his son should come and the wife should come. became ein b'zeh mayim chadoshes ala omer l'mayla ba'as el uvanecha. So what is it coming? What is the Chumash coming to tell me more than we know previously? But it says, Ki ra'isa tzaddik fani b'do v'do. It says in Netziv, Ein amuvan, lama nasan atatam v'lo ma'arisha. In other words, in the first original narrative, it doesn't say that Kodesh Baruch Hu sees Moshe as a tzaddik, but now when the Chumash supposedly repeats itself and adds the word, right? Ki ois charisa tzaddik fani b'do v'do. What is Chumash coming to tell me? Elanil b'mashmos v'chol beischa avodim uv'hem toisam yu l'tzorchei beisu v'ashisha v'lo l'kiyam ha'olam. In other words, basically, that the behemoths and all the animals will be used, right, for the purpose. In other words, we understood previously that the Teva is coming to, in fact, to maintain that the world will continue after the flood. In other words, nature, the preservation of the natural world. That's the narrative of Elokim. Here, we're speaking about that Kodesh Baruch Hu is bringing the animals also because the animals will serve man. In other words, Kodesh Baruch Hu is giving what's called an ethical command. That in fact, the man will be able to benefit from the animals, and because of that, Noach will be able to bring his children and their wives. And therefore it's going to help Noach. This is going to help Noach in what he has to do in the Teva. שמושמע קימה אוילם שניבא בשם אלוקים. אבל כאן מדבר ברחמי שמיים על נויח. Here we're speaking about God's mercy on Noach. Hashkafa yapotis l'tovas tzaddik, because the tzaddik is a person in the Chumash who has divine providence, right? Hashkafa potis, right? Al kain kozav v'yem Hashem. In other words, what the Netziv is saying, in my opinion, is that Yud Kei Vav Kei is coming to teach us how we're supposed to approach the Chumash. That the Chumash is now looking at Noach not only as a person who basically is charged with the preservation of the natural world, but actually, in fact, we're supposed to look at these psukim and see, in fact, the ethical dimension. That's why I understand what the Netziv is saying. And Netziv actually uses this technique in several places, like he himself refers to us at the very end here, in the Dibur Maschil, in Perek Zayin, Pasuk Aleph, Ki atah isa tzadik v'chulei. The Netziv says, "Kayetzi b'zeh kasabnu la'el dalet aleph." In Perek Dal Pasuk Aleph, where it says in the Chumash, "Va'odam yoda as Chava Ishtoi, right? Vatav was later as Kayin. It speaks about the birth of Kayin. Vatoima kanisi is as Hashem. So Chava says Vatoima kanisi ish, right? As Hashem, I have, right? A man is acquired. Well, kanisi is Hashem, right? In other words, we speak about I've acquired man with God. I'm going to leave that the translation maybe for another shir. But then he says, was kanisi is Hashem? So says the Netziv, right? This is in Perek Dalet, Pasuk Aleph. Kanisi ish as Hashem loy al etzem aloda amra. Right? We're not speaking. Chav is not speaking about the act of birth, which is a natural act. Shu teva b'riya, because it's part of nature. She min moedes amino. In other words, reproduction is a natural thing, right? Right. So in other words, and it says of course it was speaking about teva. Kanisi ish as Hashem. So it should be Elokim, not Yud Kei Vav Kei. אלא באשר העיסק הזה, הבלד יהיה מוקשה בייחוד לעבודת האדם כאשר יבוא, וזה יהיה טוב מיוחדת לאדם וחב. In other words, when you have children, the children are going to actually come to help you. So in other words, the birth of children is not only a natural act, but involves an ethical dimension to the creation, by which, in fact, a person in his life can be aided by his children. In fact, actually the Gemara in Yevamah speaks about that a woman could force her husband to give her a get if she's childless, because she says, I need children in my old age to help me. It's a famous Gemara in Yevamah. So in other words, so basically, so in other words, basically, Hashem is a signpost. It's coming to tell us that the pasuk is not coming to account for the natural act of reproduction, but the Yud Kei Vav Kei is actually coming to show us that there's an ethical dimension to this ethical act. So in other words, what is here the chiddush, the novel point of the commentary of the Netziv? The Netziv is not asking the question, why does it say Yud Kei Vav Kei? But that's the question of the Rishonim, and of the previous commentators, in my opinion, my humble opinion. But Netziv is saying, given the fact that it says Yud Kei Vav Kei, how can I use the meaning of Yud Kei Vav Kei as man's metaphysical and ethical relation to God to understand more properly the text of the Chumash? So this is a very, very important, it's actually a modern yesod, a very modern idea that hermeneutics, the interpretation of the Chumash, draws upon what you would call calls us and gives direction to the method of hermeneutical interpretation that will be used by the reader in trying to find meaning in the Chumash. So we have over here a very, very interesting, it's almost like a revolutionary to think of the Netziv, that meaning of the Chumash is consciously calling on man as the interpreter. The Chumash is beckoning man to interpret it. Just as this is Vayikra Hashem in the beginning of Vayikra, right? Vayemer Elav, so what's Vayikra Hashem? So the Rashi breaks himself into Teres Kahanim. Hakadosh Baruch Hu uses a lashon of chiba. Kiviyachal Hakadosh Baruch Hu is beckoning Moshe to come interpret the Torah, like the Gemara says in Peites and Aleph in Shabbos, because Baruch is putting Ksarim on the Oisias. I'm not coming here to give a drasha. This is not the purpose of Hashkafa Shel Datkam. But nonetheless, the question is that there's a beckoning of the text for the reader to interpret it and to find meaning in it. And that Netziv understands that this is actually the yesod of the differences in the Shemus Hashem, Elokim, Yud Kei Vav Kei. So we don't have to say that there is two texts and two gods, that Elo is the Elo is God and the Yahweh is God, the E text and the J text, where we say it in a frum way, we say it in a scholarly way. But in fact, actually, the different Shemus Hashem are actually coming to direct the reader in how to understand the actual text themselves. This is a very, very important yesod here that we see in the Netziv. Now, it turns out, right, is that the Netziv is actually this notion that the text itself is coming to inform us of fact, actually how we're supposed to understand the text, is actually a very interesting thing, because we see that the human creative act of interpretation is built into the text. In other words, the text is not something which stands independent of the creative interpretation. The text actually calls upon the reader to interpret the text. And I think, lahavdil, of course, right? I think that's really Auerbach's position in this essay, Odysseus' Scar. That the purpose, that the Chumash is coming to bring the reader into the text and become part of the text. The reader, the interpreter, becomes part of the text, but it's only the interpreter who can, in fact, complete the literary, the literary work and find meaning into it. And this is the ploy, the technique. I'm saying technique, this is, of course, the Devar Hashem, but the literary technique is to draw the reader and make the reader's creative interpretation guided by, in fact, the text itself as really being part of being the text. Now, the fact is that we spoke previously about another theme of the Netziv, and we spoke about the Netziv very, very much used the Zitzenleben, right? In other words, that the Netziv looked for Chazal as a Zitzenleben of the text itself too. Actually, these two themes are related, because what is a Zitzenleben? In a certain sense, Chazal too were directing the reader to try to understand the context of the text too. Just like the Chumash itself, through the Shemas Hashem, is directing the reader towards interpretation. Zitzenleben is also a means by which Chazal directed the reader towards interpretation. And the Netziv actually, in the case of Bereshis, actually expands upon that very interestingly enough in Parak Yud Beis and Pasuk Yud Zayin. And there, the Netziv speaks about the Avos HaKadoshim, and there, the Netziv tries to take Chazal and is using Chazal as the means by which you're supposed to interpret the text itself. In other words, not that the Netziv is saying how Chazal are interpreting the text, but Chazal create what you would call the natural laws, or the laws of, the basic principles. And once Chazal create the basic principles, then the reader or the commentator, the interpreter, is actually called upon to use these principles, and use these principles actually interpreting the text itself. So the Netziv in Parak Yud Beis Pasuk Yud Zayin speaks about, brings different Chazals, which in fact focus either on Avraham Avinu, who is Torah, some brings Chazals on that, Yitzchak, who's Avodah, and Yaakov Avinu, who's Chesed. In fact, the famous Chazal in the Gemara Pesachim Daf Peches, Avraham Avinu, right, called it a Har, right? Yitzchak called that Har Maria, Yitzchak called it a Soda, Yaakov called it a Bayis. And the Netziv takes these Chazals and says, okay, now we have the rules. Now we have the rules. Let's take these rules and try to use these rules to interpret the psukim themselves. This is a very interesting Netziv. So in other words, what the Netziv is saying is, Chazal are the guideposts. In other words, we're not, the chiddush of the Netziv is, I'm not supposed to interpret the Gemara. The Gemara is giving me the guideposts. The Gemara is giving you the Shemas Hashem. I take the Chazal, which defines the obvious in three different ways, and I use that now as the means by which I'm going to interpret the story of the Yavos. So once again, this is what's called Chazal imitati pentity. Meaning that what? Meaning that just like the Chumash itself used the Shemas Hashem as the guideposts, or the directions by which the interpreter understands the psukim, so too Chazal were actually the guideposts, right? The means by which the interpreter comes and tries to understand the psukim in Bereshis. Okay, I'm not going to go any further into this, because this is actually something which the reader, I hope that some of you are being inspired to actually read Amak Dov himself, and in Yetz Hashem, next time we will continue on another interesting theme in the challenges of the text of the Chumash. But until then, from an undisclosed place in Yerushalayim, Ir HaKodesh, be well.